The golden rays of dawn filtered through the stained glass windows of Riverstone Church, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the worn wooden pews. For decades, this sanctuary had stood as a beacon of hope and salvation in the small Florida community, a place where families gathered to celebrate life's milestones, seek guidance through hardships, and find solace in shared faith. But on that crisp October morning, the sacred silence was shattered by the wail of police sirens. Red and blue lights pulsed against the whitewashed exterior, transforming the peaceful scene into something out of a nightmare. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, creating a perimeter around what was once considered hallowed ground. Local residents emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, their faces etched with confusion and concern. Some clutched coffee mugs, others held children close, all watching as officers in tactical gear approached the church entrance with weapons drawn. The whispers began to spread through the gathering crowd. Something unthinkable had happened within those walls. Something that would forever change how they viewed their community, their church, and the man they had trusted to guide their spiritual lives. Inside Riverstone Church, detectives encountered a scene that would haunt them for years to come. Pastor Adam J. Simpson, the charismatic, beloved spiritual leader who had shepherded his congregation for over 15 years, sat motionless in front of the altar. His once pristine white shirt was now crimson, his hands caked with dried blood. But it wasn't his appearance that caused veteran officers to pause, it was what surrounded him. The walls of the sanctuary, once adorned with scripture and crosses, had been transformed into a macabre canvas. Sweeping arcs and handprints of blood created patterns that seemed both random and deliberate, as if the perpetrator was creating art from atrocity. Biblical verses were scrawled in blood across the pulpit where Simpson had delivered countless sermons on forgiveness, redemption, and moral righteousness. At his feet lay the body of his wife, Sarah J. Chandler, her pregnant form still and silent on the church floor. The medical examiner would later determine she had been dead for approximately 8 hours before discovery. When officers approached Simpson, he made no attempt to flee or resist. He simply looked up with vacant eyes and whispered, "I've cleansed this house of sin." What transforms a respected spiritual leader into an alleged killer? How does a man who counseled couples through marital difficulties, who preached about the sanctity of life and the power of forgiveness, commit such a brutal act against the woman who shared his bed and bore his children? The case of Adam J. Simpson forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, that sometimes the most monstrous acts are committed not by strangers lurking in shadows, but by those we trust implicitly. It challenges our understanding of faith and hypocrisy, of public persona versus private reality. As investigators peeled back the layers of the Simpson family's life, they discovered a web of secrets, lies, and betrayals that had been festering beneath their picture-perfect exterior. The respected pastor, his beautiful wife, and his influential father, Chad J. Fernandez, had been entangled in a triangle of deception that would ultimately end in bloodshed. Tonight, we'll examine how this tragedy unfolded, the warning signs that went unheeded, the moments when intervention might have changed the outcome, and the devastating aftermath that continues to ripple through the community years later. Before we dive deeper into this disturbing case, I want to take a moment to connect with you, my audience. Stories like Adam Simpson's are difficult to tell and often even harder to hear. They challenge our faith in humanity and force us to confront the darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary people. At True Crime Story Files, we believe these stories deserve to be told. Not for sensationalism, but because understanding the psychology behind such crimes might help prevent future tragedies. Your support allows us to continue this important work, researching cases thoroughly and presenting them with the respect and sensitivity they deserve. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your subscription not only helps us grow, but sends a message that thoughtful, well-researched, true crime content matters. Hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss an upload. Especially important for cases like this one that unfold over multiple episodes. Now, let's return to Riverstone Church on that fateful morning, as investigators began the painstaking process of piecing together how a respected pastor came to murder his pregnant wife and desecrate his own church with her blood. A story of betrayal that began years earlier with a secret that would destroy 3 lives. Nestled along Florida's Gulf Coast, the town of Oakdale embodied small-town America at its most devout. With just over 12,000 residents, 5 churches dotted the main thoroughfare, but none commanded the respect and attendance of Riverstone Church. Sunday mornings transformed the sleepy streets into processions of well-dressed families, Bibles in hand, converging on the white-columned sanctuary that had stood as the community's spiritual center for 3 generations. Adam J. Simpson hadn't always seemed destined for the pulpit. As a teenager, he rebelled against his father's strict religious household, preferring basketball courts to prayer meetings. Former classmates described him as charismatic but troubled, a young man searching for identity in his father's imposing shadow. After a brief stint at community college and what church members vaguely referred to as a period of wilderness, Adam returned to Oakdale transformed, claiming a spiritual awakening that set him on the path to ministry. By age 30, Adam had completed seminary and returned to assist his father at Riverstone. His preaching style contrasted sharply with Chad Fernandez's fire and brimstone approach. Where Chad thundered about sin and damnation, Adam spoke of grace and second chances. His sermons wove modern references with Scripture, making ancient texts feel relevant to everyday struggles. He made you feel like God understood your problems, one congregant later told investigators. Like redemption was always possible, no matter what you'd done. When Chad suffered a minor stroke in 2015, Adam stepped into the senior pastor role with apparent reluctance but undeniable readiness. Under his leadership, church attendance grew by nearly 40%. He launched community outreach programs, youth initiatives, and marriage counseling services that extended Riverstone's influence beyond Sunday mornings. Local business owners sought his advice. School principals invited him to speak at graduations. The mayor consulted him on community matters. Adam Simpson became more than a pastor. He became Oakdale's moral compass. Sarah J. Chandler entered Adam's life during his seminary years, a soft-spoken music teacher with an angelic voice who joined Riverstone's worship team shortly before Adam's return. Their courtship was brief but public, with Chad Fernandez himself blessing the union from the pulpit. Sarah transitioned seamlessly into the role of pastor's wife, leading women's ministry events, organizing charity drives, and supporting Adam's vision for the church while maintaining her teaching position at Oakdale Elementary. Together, they projected an image of marital harmony that many in the congregation aspired to emulate. Their Christmas cards featured professional family portraits with their 2 children, Emma and Noah, all matching outfits and perfect smiles. Sarah's social media accounts documented family vacations, anniversary celebrations, and quiet moments of domestic bliss. They were what every Christian couple wanted to be, recalled a church elder, devoted to each other, to their children, and to God's work. Chad Fernandez remained a formidable presence at Riverstone, despite his semi-retirement. The church had been his creation, built from a small prayer group in his living room to the influential institution it became. His portrait hung prominently in the church foyer, his name etched on the cornerstone. Though he publicly supported Adam's leadership, observant congregants noticed the subtle corrections during board meetings, the slight grimaces during his son's more progressive sermons. There was always tension, a church secretary later admitted. Like Adam was being measured against an impossible standard. What no one recognized, not the adoring congregation, not the respectful community, perhaps not even Adam himself, were the hairline fractures forming beneath the polished surface of the Simpson family legacy. Invisible fault lines that, when pressure increased, would rupture with devastating consequences. Early warning signs. The first cracks in the Simpson family facade appeared so gradually that few noticed them forming. In retrospect, congregants would recall subtle shifts in dynamics during church functions, moments that seemed insignificant until illuminated by the horror that followed. Sarah's transformation began approximately 8 months before the murder. The once vibrant woman who coordinated potlucks, led choir practice, and organized women's retreats began declining invitations and delegating responsibilities. Her trademark enthusiasm during worship services dimmed. Her voice, once soaring above the congregation, became hesitant and subdued. When questioned about her withdrawal, Sarah offered vague explanations about fatigue or minor health concerns. "She stopped meeting my eyes," recalled Diane Mercer, Sarah's closest friend in the congregation. "We'd been in the same prayer group for years, but suddenly she was canceling or sitting silently through meetings. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd smile, this empty smile, and say, 'Just tired, that's all.' But her hands would tremble when she reached for her coffee cup." Sarah's phone, once frequently used to coordinate church activities, became a source of apparent anxiety. Congregants noticed her flinching when it chimed during gatherings, stepping away to answer calls in hushed tones. Her social media presence, once filled with family photos and inspirational quotes, grew sparse and impersonal. The children, previously fixtures at church events, began appearing without their mother, accompanied instead by Adam or a teenage babysitter. Meanwhile, Adam's behavior shifted in more assertive ways. The pastor, known for his relaxed, approachable demeanor, developed an edge of irritability. Church staff reported increasing micromanagement, Adam reviewing email communications, questioning Sarah's whereabouts, and calling multiple times when she was teaching at the elementary school. During counseling sessions, he began emphasizing wifely submission and the dangers of secret keeping in marriages. He installed security cameras at their home, a church deacon later revealed. Said it was because of some minor vandalism in the neighborhood, but there were cameras pointing at the driveway, the doors, even the backyard. It seemed excessive. Perhaps most telling were the interactions between Chad Fernandez and Sarah. The former pastor, who had always maintained a formal, somewhat distant relationship with his daughter-in-law, suddenly displayed solicitous concern for her well-being. He began appearing at the elementary school to drive Sarah home when her car was in the shop, bringing meals when Adam was traveling for conferences, and engaging her in lengthy conversations after Sunday services. "Something felt off about how Chad hovered around Sarah," observed the church receptionist. "It wasn't fatherly, it was almost possessive. And the way Sarah would tense up when he entered a room. I sensed discomfort, but couldn't put my finger on why." On a bright Sunday morning in April, Riverstone Church erupted in applause when Adam and Sarah stepped to the pulpit with a special announcement. Sarah, wearing a floral dress that concealed her barely showing stomach, blushed as Adam placed his hand protectively over her abdomen. "God has blessed our family with another miracle," Adam announced, his voice cracking with apparent emotion. "After 5 years of prayer, Sarah and I are expecting our third child this November." The congregation rose in a standing ovation. Elderly women wiped tears. Young mothers rushed forward to embrace Sarah. Church elders clapped Adam on the back. The couple had been open about their desire for another child, even sharing during prayer meetings about their struggles to conceive again after Noah's difficult birth. This pregnancy represented not just a personal blessing but a testament to the power of faith and perseverance, themes Adam had preached passionately. "I've never seen Adam so happy," recalled the church youth pastor. He practically floated through the reception afterward, accepting congratulations and already discussing names. He kept his hand on Sarah's back the entire time, like he was shielding her and the baby from the world. Only a few observers noted Chad Fernandez's reaction to the announcement. The elder pastor remained seated during the standing ovation, his expression unreadable. When he finally approached the couple to offer congratulations, witnesses described the exchange as stiff and formal. Chad kissed Sarah's cheek, lingering perhaps a moment too long, before whispering something that made her face pale momentarily. "I thought it was strange that Chad didn't seem happier about becoming a grandfather again," one church elder later told investigators. "He'd always doted on Emma and Noah, but with this pregnancy, he seemed conflicted." As Sarah's pregnancy progressed through spring and into summer, the timeline of the Simpson family's deterioration accelerated in parallel. Each ultrasound appointment and baby milestone became marked by increasingly visible tension. Sarah's prenatal checkups, initially attended by an enthusiastic Adam, became solo visits by July. The gender reveal party, planned for the congregation, was abruptly canceled without explanation. Sarah's baby bump grew alongside the dark circles under her eyes and her increasing absences from church functions. By August, Adam had stopped mentioning the pregnancy in his sermons. The prayer chain, which had faithfully lifted up Sarah and the baby weekly since the announcement, received a terse request from Adam to pray for the Simpson family without specific details. Chad, meanwhile, began making pointed comments during elder meetings about family legacy and bloodlines. Statements that confused his colleagues, but would later take on sinister significance. If you're finding this story compelling, hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps our channel reach more viewers interested in these complex true crime cases. Plus, I'd love to hear your theories about what might have been happening behind closed doors in the Simpson family. What warning signs do you think friends and family missed? Let me know in the comments section. The revelation that shattered Adam Simpson's world came not through confession, but through technology. A cruel digital breadcrumb trail that led him to an unthinkable truth. On September 12th, while Sarah attended a prenatal appointment, Adam used her laptop to prepare Sunday's sermon notes. When a text message notification appeared on the synced iPad, Adam's casual glance became a horrified stare. The message from Chad Fernandez read simply, "Doctor confirmed everything's fine with our baby. Stop worrying. Delete this." According to case files, Adam spent the next 3 hours methodically searching through Sarah's devices, uncovering hundreds of messages exchanged between his wife and father dating back nearly 2 years. The communications revealed not just an ongoing physical affair, but deep emotional entanglement. In one message, Sarah had written, "Sometimes I think we should just tell him the truth. Living this lie is destroying me." Chad's response was chilling in its calculation. He would never understand. The church would collapse. We need to be patient. Most devastating were the messages discussing the pregnancy. Explicit confirmations that Chad believed himself to be the father of Sarah's unborn child. Photos recovered from a password-protected folder showed Sarah and Chad together in locations outside of Oakdale, including a beachfront hotel 3 hours away where they had apparently met monthly under the guise of worship conference planning. The digital evidence painted a picture of profound betrayal, explained forensic psychologist Dr. Elaine Markham during the trial. Adam Simpson was facing not one but 2 simultaneous betrayals from the people he trusted most: his father, his spiritual mentor and predecessor, and his wife, the mother of his children. This type of dual betrayal creates a psychological perfect storm. Adam's mental state deteriorated rapidly following his discovery. Security footage from Riverstone Church showed him entering the building at 2:17 a.m. that night, remaining alone in the sanctuary until dawn. Church cleaning staff reported finding shattered communion glasses and a Bible with dozens of pages torn out the next morning. For 3 days, Adam maintained a facade of normalcy while internally spiraling. He led Wednesday night Bible study, counseled a struggling couple, even attended a school function for his daughter. But inside, according to journals later found in his office, he was experiencing what psychiatrists would describe as acute psychological decompensation, his sense of reality and identity collapsing under the weight of betrayal. The confrontation with Chad occurred the day before the murder. Adam invited his father to the church office under the pretense of discussing the upcoming baptism service. Security cameras captured their meeting, which began cordially but escalated dramatically. Though no audio was recorded, body language analysis indicated the moment Adam revealed his knowledge, Chad physically recoiling, then assuming a defensive posture. What makes this case particularly tragic from a psychological perspective, Dr. Markham explained, is that Adam's entire identity was built around his roles as pastor, husband, and son. All 3 identities were simultaneously decimated by this revelation. For someone whose life centered on moral authority and spiritual leadership, discovering such profound hypocrisy within his own family created an irreconcilable cognitive dissonance, a psychological injury from which some individuals cannot recover. The events of October 17th unfolded with a terrible precision that investigators would later reconstruct through security footage, cell phone records, and Adam's own chilling confession. The timeline began at 7:42 p.m. when Sarah received a text message from Adam asking her to meet him at Riverstone Church to discuss our future. Their children had been conveniently sent to stay with Sarah's sister for the night, a detail that prosecutors would later cite as evidence of premeditation. Security cameras captured Sarah's sedan pulling into the empty church parking lot at 8:17 p.m. She sat in her car for nearly 4 minutes before entering the building, her hesitation suggesting apprehension about the meeting. Adam had arrived 30 minutes earlier, disabling the interior security cameras, another detail that would weigh heavily against him at trial. What transpired inside Riverstone Church over the next 2 hours was pieced together through forensic evidence and Adam's eventual statements to investigators. Sarah entered through the side door, using her key to access the darkened building. Only the sanctuary was illuminated, candles placed around the altar creating an almost ceremonial atmosphere. Adam waited in the front pew, a folder of printed text messages and photos laid out beside him. "I didn't raise my voice," Adam later told detectives. "I simply asked her if it was true. She didn't deny it. She just started crying and saying she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me. Then she said the baby was his, my father's. That's when everything went red." The confrontation escalated when Sarah attempted to leave. According to Adam's confession, he blocked her path and demanded more answers. How long? Why his father? Did she ever love him at all? The physical altercation began when Sarah tried to push past him toward the door. Adam grabbed her arm, then her throat, in what he claimed was an attempt to make her stay and explain. The medical examiner's report detailed the brutal reality. Sarah suffered a crushed trachea and multiple blunt force traumas to her head, where Adam had slammed her against the communion table repeatedly. The fatal injury came when her head struck the corner of the marble altar, causing catastrophic brain hemorrhaging. Death would have occurred within minutes. What followed transformed a tragic homicide into something far more disturbing. In a state that Adam's psychiatrist would later describe as acute dissociative psychosis, he carried Sarah's body to the altar and, using a communion knife, made a series of incisions on her arms and torso. The blood collected became his medium for what he described as cleansing the sanctuary. "I was purifying the house of God," Adam stated in his confession. "Every place they had desecrated with their sin, I marked with her blood. Every lie they had told in that sacred space needed to be covered. I was following biblical precedent. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins." For hours, Adam methodically painted the walls with handprints, wrote scripture verses about adultery and betrayal across the pulpit, and created a macabre circle of blood around the altar where Sarah's body lay. Church members would later identify the pattern as resembling the circle of protection Adam had often referenced in sermons, a spiritual boundary against evil. By dawn, Adam had completed his gruesome work. Security footage showed no attempt to flee or conceal his actions. Instead, he sat in the front pew, Sarah's blood dried on his hands and clothing, staring at the altar until the church custodian arrived and discovered the horrific scene. "In my 20 years studying criminal psychology," forensic psychiatrist Dr. Raymond Torres testified, "I've rarely encountered a case where religious symbolism and psychological breakdown merged so completely. Adam Simpson didn't just kill his wife. He performed a twisted ritual that made sense only within his fractured reality, a reality where he was both victim and divine instrument of justice." At 6:15 a.m., Riverstone Church custodian Miguel Ramirez arrived for his morning duties, using his key to enter through the rear maintenance door. Following his usual routine, he began in the fellowship hall before making his way toward the sanctuary to vacuum before the women's prayer group arrived at 7:30. The moment he pushed open the sanctuary doors, his ordinary workday transformed into a waking nightmare. "I thought it was paint at first," Ramirez later testified, his voice breaking. "Red paint everywhere, some kind of vandalism. Then I saw Pastor Adam sitting there, covered in it, and Mrs. Chandler on the altar. I backed out and called 911. I couldn't go back in there. Police response was swift and overwhelming. Within 4 minutes of Ramirez's call, 3 patrol cars arrived, followed shortly by detectives, crime scene technicians, and eventually the county medical examiner. Officers approaching the scene described Adam as catatonic, unresponsive to commands, yet conscious, staring straight ahead as if in a trance. He didn't resist arrest, Officer Daniela Morales recalled. When we approached with weapons drawn, he simply raised his hands, still covered in dried blood. The only thing he said was, it had to be done. He allowed himself to be handcuffed and walked to the patrol car without assistance. His affect was completely flat, no emotion whatsoever. As Adam was placed in the police cruiser, news of the murder spread through Oakdale with devastating speed. Church members arriving for the morning prayer meeting collapsed in grief on the lawn. Schools announced emergency counseling services. Local businesses closed out of respect. By noon, the street outside Riverstone Church resembled a vigil, with hundreds of community members gathering to process their collective shock. Media trucks from Tampa and Orlando arrived by midday, broadcasting aerial footage of the church surrounded by crime scene tape. The headline, "Pastor Murders Pregnant Wife, Desecrates Church with Her Blood," flashed across television screens statewide. National news picked up the story by evening, focusing on the religious elements and the shocking betrayal of pastoral trust. "This community is in absolute shock," Mayor Helen Dela Cruz told reporters. "The Simpsons were our spiritual leaders, role models for our children. To have something this horrific happen within our church, it's beyond comprehension. We're all struggling to make sense of a senseless act." As Adam Simpson was processed at the county detention center, his mugshot showing vacant eyes and blood still visible in his hairline, the community he once led grappled with a tragedy that defied understanding and a betrayal that cut to the heart of their shared faith. The state of Florida vs. Adam J. Simpson began 9 months after Sarah's murder, drawing national attention and filling the county courthouse beyond capacity. Prosecutors painted Adam as a calculating killer who, upon discovering his wife's infidelity, methodically planned her execution. They emphasized the disabled security cameras, the children's convenient absence, and the luring of Sarah to an empty church as evidence of premeditation. This was not a crime of passion, State Attorney Melissa Hernandez argued in her opening statement. This was a deliberate, ritualistic murder carried out by a man who believed his position as a spiritual leader gave him the right to be judge, jury, and executioner. The defense team, led by prominent attorney James Whitaker, pursued a temporary insanity defense, arguing that the dual betrayal by wife and father triggered an acute psychotic break. They presented Adam's previously unblemished record, testimonials from congregants about his gentle nature, and extensive psychological evaluations. What happened that night was the psychological equivalent of a perfect storm, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Eleanor Patel testified. Mr. Simpson experienced what we call narcissistic injury of catastrophic proportions. His entire identity as husband, son, and spiritual leader was simultaneously destroyed. In that moment, he lost touch with reality. The trial's most dramatic day came when Chad Fernandez took the stand. Initially attempting to deny the affair, Chad crumbled under cross-examination when confronted with the extensive digital evidence. He eventually admitted to the 2-year relationship with Sarah and his belief that he had fathered her unborn child. "Yes, I betrayed my son," Chad finally confessed, his reputation disintegrating with each admission. "Yes, I violated everything I ever preached. I have no excuse." DNA results presented during the trial confirmed what the text messages had suggested. Chad was indeed the biological father of Sarah's unborn child. This revelation sent audible gasps through the courtroom and cemented the community's disgust with the former pastor. After 7 days of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for just 11 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The jury had rejected both the first-degree murder charge sought by prosecutors and the insanity defense presented by Adam's attorneys, finding middle ground in acknowledging the crime was not premeditated, but that Adam remained legally responsible for his actions. At sentencing, Judge Carolyn Michaels handed down a 30-year prison term without possibility of parole. Given the opportunity to make a final statement, Adam spoke publicly for the first time since his arrest. "I stand before God having failed in every way a man can fail," he said, his voice barely audible. "I could not protect my marriage, my church, or even myself from darkness. I took a life I had vowed to cherish. No punishment this court can give will exceed the one I live with every day. I only ask forgiveness for my children, who must now bear the burden of both parents' sins." In the months following Adam Simpson's sentencing, the Oakdale community struggled to rebuild from the tragedy that had shattered their collective faith. Riverstone Church, once the spiritual center of the town, stood empty for nearly a year. Its sanctuary scrubbed clean of physical evidence but forever marked by the memory of what had occurred there. Congregants scattered to other churches, unable to worship in a space so deeply tainted by betrayal and violence. Eventually, the church building was sold to a non-denominational organization that renamed it New Covenant Fellowship. The proceeds were placed in a trust for Emma and Noah Simpson, who went to live with Sarah's sister in North Carolina. Court records indicate that both children receive ongoing psychological support, their young lives forever altered by the actions of the adults who should have protected them. Chad Fernandez faced no criminal charges, adultery itself not being illegal, but his fall from grace was absolute. Publicly disowned by the religious community he once led, he relocated to Arizona, where reports suggest he lives in relative isolation. His attempts to contact his grandchildren have been legally blocked by their guardian, and the ministerial credentials he held for 40 years were formally revoked by his denomination. This case exemplifies the dangerous intersection of religious authority and unchecked power, noted Dr. Vanessa Rodriguez, author of Faith and Abuse: Power Dynamics in Religious Communities. When spiritual leaders operate without accountability, congregations can become isolated environments where misconduct flourishes behind closed doors. The Simpson tragedy highlights the need for transparent leadership structures and external oversight within religious organizations. The case prompted several Florida churches to implement formal ethics policies, including mandatory reporting channels for misconduct and regular leadership reviews. Seminaries across the state added coursework on maintaining appropriate boundaries and recognizing signs of psychological distress in clergy. For Oakdale residents, the healing process continues. A memorial garden dedicated to Sarah and her unborn child was established in the town park, serving as a quiet place of reflection and a reminder of the community's resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy. If you want to support our channel and help us continue bringing you these important stories, please consider becoming a channel member. Your support allows us to dedicate the time and resources necessary to research these complex cases thoroughly and present them with the sensitivity they deserve. Members also gain access to exclusive content, including extended interviews with experts, early access to new episodes, and behind-the-scenes insights into our investigative process. Just click the Join button below this video to see the membership options available. The tragedy of Riverstone Church serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly the foundations of trust can collapse when those we elevate to positions of moral authority fail to uphold their own teachings. This case isn't merely about a murder. It's about the cascading consequences when sacred boundaries are violated and when spiritual power becomes a shield behind which human frailties fester unchecked. Mental health professionals who reviewed this case have identified several warning signs that might help prevent similar tragedies. The isolation of leadership, lack of accountability structures, and the community's unwillingness to question those in authority all contributed to an environment where misconduct could remain hidden. Dr. Martin Reeves, a specialist in clergy psychology, notes that the pedestal we place religious leaders on often prevents them from seeking help when they're struggling. The expectation of moral perfection becomes a prison that makes honest conversation about temptation or mental health nearly impossible. Perhaps the most difficult question this case raises is about the nature of forgiveness itself, a central tenet of the faith that both Adam and Chad preached, but ultimately failed to embody. When betrayal comes from those who taught us about trust, when violence erupts from those who preached peace, how do we reconcile our beliefs with such profound contradictions? Is there room for redemption after such devastating breaches of faith? And if so, what form might it take? The Simpson case reminds us that no community, regardless of its stated values, is immune to the darkest aspects of human nature. It challenges us to examine how we build our institutions, who we entrust with authority, and whether we've created systems that protect the vulnerable or merely preserve the powerful. If this story affected you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch our next investigation. Your engagement helps us continue exploring these complex intersections of faith, psychology, and justice.